I was completely in love with it from the minute I opened the page.
I went into the bedroom to smoke a joint. I lit it up, and I turned around, and there's John Lennon sitting on the floor.
That's what every writer is shooting for, is that number one slot, and it's terrific to have landed there.
This is Off the Shelf, and on your radio.
This is Adam Rothberg. Our guest is Brad Thor. With his thriller, The Last Patriot, Brad joined the elite ranks of authors who can land a hardcover book in the #1 spot on the bestseller list in its very first week on sale. Brad's specialty is the international thriller, featuring his continuing character, Navy SEAL turned Homeland Security operative Scott Harvath. In The Last Patriot, he ties together a plot that combines the current war on terror with the long-suppressed revelations of the Prophet Muhammad and the political savvy and foresight and all-around genius of Thomas Jefferson, and some pretty neat puzzles to boot. For his work writing thrillers such as The Lions of Lucerne, Takedown, and The First Commandment, the Chicago Tribune has said that Brad is quite possibly the next coming of Robert Ludlum. Now available in paperback, we talked with Brad about The Last Patriot just as the book was initially published. Let's take a listen. Brad, welcome to Off the Shelf.
Hi, Adam. It's great to be with you. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks. So when you read that quote in the Chicago Tribune, what was your reaction? Did you get this big sinking feeling in your stomach like, oh no, they've raised the bar impossibly high?
Absolutely not. I said it's finally time they realized it. You know, that's the first time, that was on my 6th book. It was the first time I'd ever been reviewed in my hometown newspaper. All kidding aside, that's an incredible compliment, and it was wonderful to receive that.
And those are some very big shoes to fill in the world of thriller writers, aren't they?
Well, it is if Robert Ludlum keeps cranking them out the way he has. I've never seen anybody so prolific after death.
But for you, a #1 bestseller, that's got to be pretty heady stuff.
Oh, it's such an honor. It's absolutely wonderful. And, of course, this is what all of us, no matter what anybody says, that's what every writer is shooting for, is that #1 slot. And it's terrific to have landed there.
Great. Let's talk a little bit about what's actually between the covers now. There's been a fair amount of controversy around The Last Patriot. Can you explain quickly the premise of the book and what's exactly causing all the trouble?
You bet. The premise for my book is that the Prophet Muhammad had a final revelation, and he went to share it with his disciples, and they assassinated him to keep it out of the Quran. Now, that's a fictional premise, although there is a significant amount of evidence in Islamic tradition that Muhammad was assassinated, including even the Prophet's own words that he was assassinated. So that's the premise for the book, that there is a missing chapter from the Quran. And what my books are political thrillers. They all take place in present day. And what has happened is, in present day, we have found out that this chapter exists. And if this chapter can be found, it will have an incredible impact on Islam. Now, that is what's causing all the controversy. I am claiming what is considered blasphemous, that the Prophet Muhammad was assassinated by his own disciples, known in Islam as the companions. That's blasphemous. I'm saying that he was assassinated to keep a chapter out of the Quran, and thereby I'm fictionalizing that the Quran is incomplete and imperfect. Also blasphemous, even though I'm just saying it in a fictional sense. But you know what? We've seen these Islamic thugs react this way to the satanic verses, to other books that deal with Islam, and I always say that as an American writer, I have the right to write whatever I want, and that's equaled by another right just as powerful, which is the right not to read it.
But there's been some suggestion that the premise of the book would be subversive or possibly disrespectful to Islamic theology.
Oh, absolutely. And that was made clear to me right in the beginning. Let's get something straight. The only people that find this disrespectful are the radical Islamists. They're the only ones. I have had Muslim people say they love the book. There's positive Muslim characters in there. So, at the end of the day, I don't really care what the radical Islamists think. I don't think they're going down to their local bookstore and buying up copies of my book. At the end of the day, Islam is not perfect. It is not above fictionalization any more so than Judaism, Christianity, or Buddhism is.
So if you thought you could build a good story around it, you'd do a similar take on Jewish theology or fundamentalist Christianity?
Sure, I would do it. I would do it in a heartbeat. Yeah, if I had a great idea for something in Judaism, I'd do it, or Christianity, I'd do it. But I would treat those religions with respect. And again, if I wanted to inflame with this book, if my goal was to inflame the Muslim community, there's a lot of skeletons in the Muslim closet I could have dragged out, and I didn't on purpose because I was not trying to put a sharp stick in the eye of Islam with this book. I'm just trying to write a great political thriller.
But it's really about radical anything, right? And intolerance and not being able to listen to an alternate perspective.
Yeah, yes and no, Adam. To tell you the truth, listen, you and I both know, as do our listeners right now, that there is no other community on the face of this planet as combustible as the radical Islamists. Nobody else. So this is something, like I said, I was warned early on that it was going to ruffle some feathers, and I said, you know what, to hell with them. This is a great book, and I hope people enjoy it and that they learn something, because it's only through more criticism, not less, and this has been said by many Muslim people themselves. Islam needs more criticism, not less. That's what's going to bring that 7th century religion into the 21st century.
Great, and you've actually had some threats to your life, haven't you?
Well, multiple.
So writing's now become a dangerous activity for you.
It has. Unfortunately, now I'm lucky in that with the Salman Rushdie comparison, I've had a lot of people in the press say, is Brad Thor the next Salman Rushdie? I sure hope not, because Salman Rushdie had a $5 million price tag on his head, and at one point British intelligence said they believed there were over 100 Muslim assassins who traveled to London to try to kill him. I mean, he was in hiding for 10 years. I don't want that. But at the end of the day, I also don't want us to become so politically correct that we stop standing up for what's right.
One of the other things I loved about your book was how you brought Thomas Jefferson into it. I thought, I was reading it, and Scott Harvath's in Paris, then he's in Virginia and Washington, and you've got a plot that goes back to the 6th century, and then you're dealing with puzzles that Thomas Jefferson made. How did you bring him into the story?
Well, it's interesting. I had this idea, as you know, about Muhammad having a final revelation that gets lost only to be rediscovered today. And I needed a bridge between 7th century Arabia and today. And I had read an interesting article shortly after 9/11 about the fact that George Bush was not the first American president to go to war with radical Islam. Thomas Jefferson was. Jefferson went to war with the Barbary pirates of North Africa. Now, we always kind of romanticize this under the umbrella of Barbary pirate, but they were the Muslim nations of North Africa, who Jefferson and John Adams, both when Adams was minister to Great Britain and Jefferson was minister to France, they tried to rationalize and reason and use diplomacy with the Muslim pirates of North Africa who kept attacking American ships. And finally Jefferson said, you know what? They don't get it. You can't rationalize with these people. The only thing they respect is force. It's very similar to what we're facing today with the threat of radical Islam. And Jefferson was afraid that one day radical Islam would come back and be a threat once again for the United States. So, I don't want to give our listeners the idea that my book is a historical novel. It's a political thriller. All takes place right now. But I use Jefferson as a bridge from Muhammad's time to ours. And what happens is in the book, someone has discovered, in the Last Patriot, someone has discovered that Jefferson was on to this missing chapter from the Quran, and that Jefferson decided to try to solve this puzzle. He tried to solve it before he died, and clues are left behind. So when word leaks out that this chapter still exists today, and the clues from Jefferson come online, that's what kicks the whole adventure off in The Last Patriot.
Hey, let's talk about your career a little bit. Before you were a writer, you were a television host on PBS, right?
Correct. I had a television travel series called Traveling Light, which was get a rail pass, get a backpack, go to Europe. I had always been a big traveler. I'm the son of a Marine. My mom was a flight attendant. They had both seen the world in those careers, and so I think I was destined to be a big international traveler because of what my parents had done. It was just in the blood. And I also think that being a lover of international travel is a big help for me as an international thriller writer.
So you took what you love to do and you made a career out of it in TV, and then you've used that in your writing.
Absolutely, and writing is something I've always wanted to do since I was a little boy. So I have made my vocation my vacation, I like to say.
But your travels when you were doing the show, they weren't exactly guided tours, were they?
No, I would get off the beaten path, and here's a couple of the mainstream things you need to see when you visit this part of the world, and then here's all the cool stuff that you're not going to get in a guidebook anywhere. So that was my thing, getting off the beaten path and giving people, that's always been my thing, is I don't want you to buy my book and say, it's just like a Patterson. I want you to buy my book and say, wow, it's better than Patterson. This is better than Clive Cussler. This is fantastic. I mean, that's my goal. I'm competing against other books, other authors. So my goal has always been to return more to my reader or to my television viewer than what they're giving me. Let's face it, books are not inexpensive. And when somebody invests not only their money but their time in me, that's the one commodity that somebody can't generate more of. So when somebody's giving me their time to sit down and read one of my books, I want to give them the best, most amazing, twisty, turny, gasping for breath thrill ride that I can. That's my job as an author.
Hey, how did you go from host of a television show on travel to published author of best-selling thrillers?
Well, it's funny. My wife and I were on our honeymoon, and we were sitting at a piazza in Italy one night, and we were having a glass of wine, and my wife said, what would you regret on your deathbed never having done? And before I could pull the words out of the air and shove them back into my mouth, I said, writing a novel and getting it published. And my wife said, fine, when we get home from our honeymoon, you need to start spending 2 hours a day, protected time, just working on making that dream come true. And what's funny is towards the end of our trip, our honeymoon in Europe, we shared a train compartment with a young brother and sister. We had an overnight ride, young brother and sister from Atlanta, Georgia. We had an overnight train ride from Munich to Amsterdam. And the sister and I talked about our love of books. We were very similar in age. We talked about how much we love thrillers and everything. And they were fans of my TV show. And at one point she asked me, she said, well, are you going to make more episodes? What are you going to do? And I said, yeah, but I'm also going to start work on a manuscript. I've always wanted to be a writer. So we talked more about books and authors who we love and all of this stuff. And when we pulled into the train station in Amsterdam the next morning, we went to exchange business cards, and I looked at hers, and she was a sales rep for Simon & Schuster. So it was an amazing kind of meant-to-be situation, and I took a year, wrote my manuscript. The two of us stayed in touch, and she helped me with some suggestions for polishing it. And the end of the story, or at least where we are now in the story, is that I've written 7 books with Simon & Schuster, with Atria and Pocket Books, and now I'm writing my 8th, 9th, and 10th.
Hey, and when you sat down to write your first book, was there anybody who you said, if I can just do something that's half as good as what he does, I'll be pretty satisfied? Well,
it's interesting. I always tell people that the worst piece of advice you get as a writer is write what you know. If that was the case, we would never have had a Ray Bradbury. We wouldn't have a J.K. Rowling. I tell people, write what you love to read. So there were several authors who I enjoyed reading. Ludlum was one of them. I enjoyed the Jason Bourne series. I love Sidney Sheldon in the way that he set his books against these incredible international backdrops. And there was one author who I had not read yet, who the Simon & Schuster sales rep, Cindy, who I met on that train ride in Europe, she had suggested to me, she said, this guy writes great thrillers and you should read them. And that was Vince Flynn.
Right.
And Vince, I read Term Limits, Vince's first book, and I loved it. And so Vince was also an inspiration for me. And sort of you look at, okay, who's a bestseller and how long are the chapters in their books? How many storylines do they have going and all that kind of stuff? Success leaves clues. And I think it's important for writers to know that success leaves clues, that oftentimes if you sow the same seeds, you can reap many of the same rewards. It doesn't mean you copy somebody else, but there are certain things you should study your marketplace. You should know what's going on, who's selling well and why. Why do people prefer a Janet Ivanovich book over a Nora Roberts book, or why do people rush out to buy both of them? It's an important thing as a writer. A lot of writers just want to be in it for the art and just write their manuscript and send it off and be done with it. But it is a business too, and it's important to know what are people enjoying reading out there. And with that in mind, you also have to not just follow the herd, you have to blaze your own trail, because it's oftentimes these people that go off in one certain direction who have a lot of success, and then they end up with a lot of imitators.
It sounds like you're inspired but methodical about it.
I think so. I think you have to be. I love what I do. I love being an author. I love going on tour and meeting my readers. I love all my readers who come to my website. We put up a discussion forum, which is probably the smartest thing I've ever done as an author, because I get to communicate with my readers on a daily basis on my website. It's a lot of fun. So I think it's important, and the readers to me are more important than the critics.
Hey, Brad, we only have time for a couple more quick questions. Can you tell us a little bit about your work with the Red Cell program?
Sure. The analytic red cell program was probably, in my opinion, it's one of the most forward-thinking and aggressive programs that the United States government put into effect after 9/11. They realized early on that what had happened due to a certain degree because of a failure of imagination on our part, and they didn't want that ever to happen again. So in an effort to stay 4 to 5 steps ahead of the terrorists, they invited creative thinkers in from outside the Beltway, from outside D.C., to help them brainstorm where the next potential terrorist attack might come from. And so they brought in people like me, some Hollywood folks, and all that kind of stuff. So that's what the analytic red cell program is, to try to brainstorm where terrorists might hit us next.
But you can't use that in your books, can you?
No, I call it the Las Vegas of government programs. What happens in the red cell unit stays in the red cell unit. That's my way of giving back to my country, to be of service to my country. So anything I develop there stays there. But the way the ideas are developed and honed inside the red cell unit, it's very similar to the way a thriller author's mind works, at least my mind works. It's a very, very good place for me to go and develop ideas, because my mind is working the same as it is when I'm in my office writing one of my novels.
Great. Hey, any movie interest in your books, Brad?
We are very happy that, yes, we have just recently done a deal. One of the key players of the deal is Avi Arad, executive producer of Spider-Man, X-Men, Iron Man, who is a fantastic, fantastic movie maker, and they're very, very excited about my Scott Harvath character in the books being made into a franchise that they're saying is going to blow the doors off Jason Bourne, and even James Bond is, the Whisper in Hollywood. So we're very excited.
From your lips to God's ears, right?
That's right. Knock on wood.
Okay, so we can expect more Scott Harvath in 2009?
You betcha.
Great. Hey, Brad, thanks for being with us today.
My pleasure, Adam. Thanks for having me on your program.
The Last Patriot is now available in paperback from Pocket Books. For more information about Brad Thor and The Last Patriot, please go to www.simonandschuster.com.